let's talk about chess. This is a main chess set that I have. Not that it gets used much, mostly just because of the fact of we have a dog, and having a glass chess set around a dog probably isn't the best idea in the world. Wooden would work better, or plastic, or something like that. But this is a nice little glass chess set that I have. I got it when I worked at Goodwill because reasons. We actually used it during my niece's bridal shower. It was Alice in Wonderland themed, and also Through the Looking Glass, and part of Through the Looking Glass takes place on a chessboard. So chessboard. On a chess set. So that. So this is the chess video. Promised I'd make one. So first of all, the history of chess can be dated back nearly 1,500 years. In its earliest known representations in India, essentially. There's some bits of the prehistory of it that are a bit more subject to speculation, give or take. Other archaeological evidence and stories and stuff like that. But at the very least, 1,500 years, which is quite impressive in all honesty. And actually, I looked up what is the oldest known chess set. So the oldest known chess set is I'm going to mispronounce this and I apologize, Afrasiab chessmen, which was found in Uzbekistan around the 8th century, so about 760 AD. It was ivory pieces, featured a king, a vizier, the queen, rooks, knights, bishops, pawns, all of that stuff. And so it's a very nice chess set. It's considered the oldest because it's one of the only ones that actually has like all of the pieces available, or almost. It's like the oldest, almost nearly complete chess set. Also, fun bit. So like with most chess sets, obviously, the horses represent the knights, but in this case, the bishops are elephants. When I'm like, that just sounds fun. Obviously, chess has evolved quite a bit over the last, 1,500 years, so there's a lot that goes into that. Okay, yeah, I at least had to throw this on here at the beginning because reasons. So, we're actually here to talk about the One Piece character named Chess, who is kind of a antagonist during Drum Island. Well, he is an antagonist. He's like one of the henchmen. He's one of Wapple's henchmen. So Chess is the former Minister of Defense serving under Wapple on Drum Island. And of course, after what happened with Blackbeard attacking the island, he becomes a pirate and, is part of the Blicking Pirates, which we'll get into in a moment. And yada, 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 he served under Wapple. He has more brain cells than Wapple, but that's not saying much. So this is here because I promised one of my other subscribers, that I would do a video about chess because they kept requesting it. So I'm like, sure, I can do that. And of course, it's kind of got paired with last week. I talked about Wapple's cover page story, and that'll tie into this, kind of. So a little bit other information about Chess, about the character itself. So Chess is 32 years old. So at the time frame that we actually interact with him in the story, he is 30. Chess is younger than I am. I am 33 as of when I am recording this video. That is just so weird because it's like, I remember growing up with One Piece and like 4Kids dub, yada, yada, yada. And then, found it again at various points and then really got back into it several years ago. And, about 5-6 years ago with COVID and everything. And now it's like, oh, yeah, now I'm older than some of these characters that when I was, a kid, like, huh. So, yeah, fun bit there. So he's 32 years old, so he's 30 during the time frame that we interact with him during Drum Island. So he, in regards to his fighting prowess, Chess is a skilled archer. We do see this throughout the course of Drum Island. He wields a large bow and has, his quivers and everything. And he can even aim and fire multiple arrows at the same time. So, he's quite good at that. I'll give him that. I'm like, well, I mean, like, as annoying and kind of semi-idiotic as Chess and Kurimarimo are, Chess is at least a skilled archer. And there's not that many other archers that we see in One Piece. I think one of the Smile users is an archer. Usopp technically can be an archer at times. I know in at least some of the filler movies and stuff like that, he's used a bow and arrow at some point in time, but it's not like it's something that he fully trains in, but it's something that would make sense to be in Usopp's wheelhouse. So into Chess's actual like history and everything. So as I said, he's 32 years old, so born 32 years ago in the One Piece world. At some point in time, he became head of staff and then eventually Minister of Defense after Wapol became king. Assumedly Chess and Kurimarimo, who's going to get mentioned a lot in this video because they're paired up a lot, literally, at some point. And what ends up happening is, assumedly, like, they kind of knew Wapol beforehand, you would think. And they were very supportive and, supportive and deferring to Wapol and everything in that regard. And eventually, they just literally approved of everything Wapol did, which of course included eliminating all the doctors on the island except for the Ishii 20 that were the ones who like personally served Wapol. Personally served, the castle. And of course, this lines up, of course, with Chopper's backstory with Kureha and Hiriluk being the only other two doctors on the island. And then, of course, kind of stuff that inspires Chopper and stuff, a bunch of that stuff, because this like ties into Chopper's backstory. So, what ends up happening is, of course, eventually, because of how this lines up, I believe Chess is there when Hiriluk shows up at the castle and makes his big speech. When Dalton's crying and when Hiriluk is dying and when he, blows himself up. I believe you came all the way upstairs and you're not even coming into the room with me. And he's like, fine, I'll come in here. Pet me, Mom. Hi. Here's a chip. He's Chip. Can I tilt this far enough for you to see him? Chip! So, essentially, Chess is, I believe, there. Chess and Kurimarimo, along with Dalton, of course, are there when Hiriluk is giving his, a man never never truly dies until he is forgotten speech, which, again, is one of the best speeches in the story. And is kind of one of the things that the story hinges upon. And so it kind of goes into that, I think Chess is there when that's happening. I don't know if we actually see Chess there, but assumedly he's there. And then we cut ahead to several years later after Hiriluk has died and everything, and Wapol is just Wapol and worse and everything. Dalton rebelled, and then Dalton got locked away, and, Wapol continues to be cruel. Chess and Kurimarimo just continue to, have fealty toward him and everything. And eventually what ends up happening is one day, shortly before, around the same time that like Luffy's journey is starting, the Blackbeard pirates show up. And they start, causing destruction and, chaos and everything on Drum Island. And of course, Chess, along with Kurimarimo and Wapol, of course, because they're just cowardly, escape Drum Island. Actually, this is like a year that this happens. Like a year, or like roughly like a year before Luffy leaves on his journey. So it's like a year that they're they're in essentially exile from Drum Island, from their home. And during that time frame, they end up forming the Blicking Pirates with Wapol as technically the captain. I say technically, he is the captain, but he's Wapol. So, and of course, the pirate crew is made up of course, Chess and Korimarimo, along with a bunch of Wapol's other guards and soldiers and such like that left with them, along with the Ishantwani, who Wapol essentially like took with him to prevent the rest of the kingdom from having proper doctors, because Wapol's a prick. And so in the story, actually, the first time that we see Chess is actually kind of an interesting thing, because I think it's right at the end of one chapter and leading into the next chapter. I know at the very least that for the episode they end it where they see Chess, and it's like someone made the comment of like, well, no man is an island, and they're like, well, except that one, and it's just Chess standing in the middle of the water in the Grand Line. Like just standing there like, like the Straw Hats are like, what in the world is going on here? So that's what's going on. So like, they just see Chess standing there, just standing in the water. And I don't know if that was like, no man is an island. I don't know if that was a 4Kids line or not, but that sounds exactly like the way Oda would actually like set up seeing a guy standing in the middle of standing on the water type of a thing. So essentially it's revealed that Chess is of course standing on top of Wapol's submarine that then launches itself up, appears. It's, the big blicking submarine, which I gotta admit, I do like. It's one of the very few submarines that we see in the story, along with the Polar Tang that Law has. And I think there's a group of pirates that we see during the Reverie that are trying to capture Rebecca and Violet, but they capture like Princess Comane as well, and like they have a submarine. So it's like, well, submarine technology is not unheard of in the One Piece world. So I like that they have Wapol have a submarine just for this gag alone, which is funny. So, the ship rises up out of the water, and all the Straw Hats are like, oh god, because the ship is just so big. And, this is where they have like the whole interaction with Wapol, with him like biting off part of the ship and everything else like that, parting off part of the Mary. And of course, the Straw Hats don't like that, because, I would not be happy either if someone came along and started eating my vessel of transportation. Regardless if it was a ship, a car, a motorcycle, a bus, a plane. This is not normal, and please stop, and what is wrong with you? So essentially what ends up happening is Chess and Korimarimo get like introduced during this time frame to a degree. They don't really do much during this interaction with the Straw Hats at first. It essentially results in like, Wapol tries to eat Luffy, and then Luffy just like bashes him. And, they get, Wapol gets sent into the sea. The Chess and the others have to go get him. And of course, Wapol, because his pride was injured, swears vengeance against the Straw Hats. So, yeah, I'm like, in their defense, you bit their ship. So, I think Luffy has a very, very valid reason as to punching you into the ocean. You just walked up and started biting and eating their ship. Prick. So, we cut ahead about a day later, and the Chess and the Blicking Pirates, led by Wapol, have decided that they are going to return to Drum Island. They've been like in exile for about a year, and now they're ready to begin terrorizing the inhabitants of the island again. I will give Chess this. Chess seems to at least have some fondness for his homeland, at the very least in the anime, when Chess is like seeing the island again. He kind of feels, he's got like some nostalgia going on, and he looks like he's kind of going to cry a little bit. It brings a tear to his eye to see his homeland again. I'll give him that. It's like, you're going to go and terrorize the citizens. You're still a horrible person. So they arrive on Drum Island. They get like the big entrance, and they end up seeing the Mary, and they're like, hey, isn't that the ship that belongs to those people that like knocked you into the ocean that you swore vengeance against? Wapol. Grrr. So Wapol is not happy. So they find out that, the Straw Hats are on the island, and they show up at like one of the main towns, one of the town there, and they start terrorizing the people. Dalton, of course, shows up and tries to stop them, and there ends up being a bit of a standoff where Chess has his bow and arrow drawn, and you would think Chess would try to attack Dalton, but that's not the way Chess works. He ends up firing at the civilians, and Dalton ends up jumping in front of the arrows in order to protect the civilians, and that's how Dalton gets hit, how he gets all the arrows in him. And gets badly injured in that regard. Still survives, to be clear, as we see, but still got hurt. So at that same time, so they have that happen. Chess hits Dalton with the arrows, and they've defeated Dalton. Chess and the Blinking Pirates, with Wapol and stuff. They're just kind of buried under an avalanche. There's just like this huge avalanche that comes right toward the town that buries them and buries Wapol, or buries Dalton in part of the town, and it's caused by the Loppins. So when we cut back, they're like digging their way out of the snow. Wapol just like chomps his way out of the snow, and him and Chess and Curry Marimo climb out. And they think that the avalanche was caused by the Straw Hats. So Chess, Wapol, and Curry Marimo decide that they're going to pursue the Straw Hats. So they start heading up toward the Drum Rockies to try to get to where they believe the Straw Hats are. Now, this is, of course, all happening while Nami is very sick, and Luffy and Sanji are making their way through Drum Island to get up to the castle on the Drum Rockies, so that way Kureha can treat Nami. And of course, Vivi and Usopp are kind of running around like they're kind of, they kind of learned some stuff about the island with Dalton and everything, who's like trying to help them find a doctor, figure out if Kureha's around. And Zoro gets lost on the island and is cold for a while as he like trains outside. And that covers all of them, because Chopper's not part of the crew yet. And so they're kind of going through and doing all of that. Vivi and, of course, Usopp end up back in the village or back in the town, and they're trying to help like dig Dalton out, so that way he can get medical treatment and everything, because they don't want Dalton to die, because he's been doing a very good job with the kingdom. And Wapol and Chess, Curry Marimo, and Wapol manage to eventually find Luffy, who is carrying Nami and Sanji at this point in time, because Nami is, of course, sick, and Sanji kind of gets injured. And, they're trying to make their way to the castle. And what ends up happening is, Wapol gets angry, and he tries to attack Luffy. Luffy, of course, ends up dodging him. And they continue to try to attack him, but the Loppins show up, because the Loppins, Luffy helped one of the Loppins. After the avalanche, he pulls one of the Loppins that's like stuck in the snow out, because he doesn't want the Loppin to die. He pulls the Loppin out of the snow, and of course this has resulted in now the Loppins want to help Luffy. So they end up fighting against Chess and Curry Marimo, giving Luffy time to escape and get to where they, this is of course when Luffy scales the Drum Rockies and everything like that, and gets his way to the castle, and has his feet and his hands all bloody and frozen and everything like that, as he, climbs up the mountains. What was it, 3,000 feet, something like that, 5,000 feet, whatever, with Nami and Sanji on his back. Just like one of those feats that you're just like, oh God, Luffy, oh God. That he climbs that far. So the Loppins fight against Chess, Curry Marimo, and such, and Wapol to a degree. When we cut back, we see that the three of them have defeated the Loppins. Unfortunately, they get pretty badly defeated, and of course they don't. They're just more annoyed now. So they're also annoyed that apparently they learned that Kureha took up residence in the castle, and Wapol is just like, that witch took up residence in my home, how dare she, type of thing. So they start scaling the Drum Rockies. Well, they don't scale the Drum Rockies. They take the they have help from Robson, who is of course Wapol's snow hippo, woolly hippo, whatever it is that he is. And they have Robson there, so they're able to get through the castle, and they end up, of course, climbing or like taking like the lift or whatever up to the castle. And they get there, and like they're, Wapple's happy to see his home again. But they end up finding, of course, that they're there to evict Kureha and Chopper out of the castle, and of course they find out that Luffy is there along with Sanji, and we get going where it's like, okay, now we kind of get to like the climactic fight that's going on here. So Luffy nearly sends Wapple flying off of the cliff with a punch. Chess and Curry Marimo save him and pull him back up. Chess then sends arrows at Sanji, but Luffy stops them because this is, of course, this takes place. So Nami is still recovering from the Kestia bite, or from the jungle fever or whatever it was that she ends up happening. I'm whatever. Nami is still recovering from that. Luffy ends up borrowing her coat that gets destroyed during this battle. And of course, Sanji was very badly injured and everything else like that during everything that happened with getting up the Drum Rockies. So he's been treated, but he is not in a condition to fight yet. So Kureha stops Sanji from fighting. The thing that I would point out about the arrows is that they are sharp objects. They are projectiles, yes, which Luffy is generally immune to, like when it comes to bullets and cannonballs and stuff like that. Luffy is generally immune to those. But arrows is a different thing because they are sharp. They are pointed. And they kind of more fall under the, the blade category of stuff that can actually hurt Luffy if he's hit with it. But like Luffy stops the arrows and stuff like that, so Sanji doesn't get hurt. Wapple is, of course, just very angry about having been humiliated by Luffy during this battle, which is, of course, is where we have the epic moment where, like, they try to destroy Hirulek's flag that's on top of the castle. That's, the skull and crossbones with the cherry blossoms. That Chopper and Kureha put up there, and they try to destroy it. And of course, Luffy stands up there, and it's, him holding it. Holding the flag with like all the smoke and everything, like tying the flag up there because it's like knocking down this that whole speech that Luffy gives there, which is what is inspiring to Chopper. And I think that's one of the moments where Kureha realizes that Chopper needs to go with these guys, that these guys would be good for Chopper. And what ends up happening is they end up, this is where we get the Chess Marimo. Don't ask me. And so Wapple, now just humiliated by what Luffy is doing, with almost knocking, he knocked him in the sea already. He almost knocked him off this cliff. He is, standing between him and Luffy, Luffy standing between him and getting into the castle and everything else like that. And what ends up happening is he's like very frustrated, turns, activates his abilities and turns into the Baku Baku factory. And he then eats Chess and Curry Marimo. And because of his abilities, he's able to fuse them together. And then, opens up his stomach, chest plate thing, whatever, and they come out and they are now formed into Chess Marimo, where it's, it's like Chess's head, or it's like Curry Marimo's head on top, Chess's head here, and then like they're like formed together, so they're like kind of twice as big as they were, and all of that stuff. And they've got 4 arms, and so they've got like Curry Marimo's boxing gloves, and they've got Chess's bow and arrow and everything. And so that's what's happening there. Chess Marimo vows to protect Wapple, and then they engage in the fight with Chopper. During this time frame, this is essentially set up as a way for kind of to show what Wapple can do with his devil fruit, which is like, okay, fair. It's an interesting way of using the devil fruit. I'm not going to argue with that. Wapple's an idiot, but he can use his devil fruit in some interesting ways. But so, we've got Chess Marimo there versus Chopper. But it's also used as a way to demonstrate what Chopper's Rumble Balls can do and what Chopper is capable of at that moment. So at that time, Chopper uses his rumble balls, and he's able to go through his jump point, his guard point, and his arm point. And like he's, fighting against Chess Marimo at this point in time. Chess Marimo, they use bow and arrows against him. They use like a hammer, I think, at one point in time that they pull out, and then at one point they have like axes that they're using to try to attack Chopper. Where they're getting these from, I don't know, but that's what they're doing. And like, so they're fighting against Chopper. And then of course Chopper ends up using his brain point to locate Chess Marimo's weak spot, which is revealed to be their chin. So at that point, once he figures out what their weak spot is, Chopper then does like the quick change, I think, back into his arm point, where he punches up directly into their chin, and they just get sent flying back, and they are defeated by Chopper. When he does his Kokute Rosio, one of his like cloven points that he does. Not his, Sakura one, but a different one that he does. And that is technically, canonically, the last time that we see Chess and Chess Marimo and Curry Marimo. That is the last canonical time that we see them. And I had forgotten that was the last time that we saw them, because I had thought, and this is partly me being affected by Stampede, which is not canon, but there's One Piece movie Stampede. And of course, almost every One Piece character that wasn't any of the Yonko essentially get cameos in that movie. As like they're either in a crowd scene or something like that. There's so many characters that we see that get cameos in that movie. And I am fine with that. It was meant as a big celebration of One Piece. But there's also the thing of the fact that Drum Island has a movie. And that's like the, Chopper's, the Drum Island movie that is essentially Chopper having a dream where he is reimagining Drum Island, but like Frankie and Robin are there, and Wapol has a weird brother who also has a devil fruit that is like mushroom based, and so it kind of rehashes what happened in the Drum Island arc. But what ends up happening is, Chopper, I believe, is still the one that defeats Chess Marimo there. But in Stampede, because of what has happened in Wapol's cover page story, which of course I just talked about last week, and at the end of that, Wapol has managed to, rebuild himself. He has a factory, has a business, he's super rich again, he's got his, supermodel beauty contestant winning wife, and he's got, the evil Black Drum Kingdom that he's built up at that point in time out of spite. And yet, despite how loyal they were to him, neither Chess nor Curry Marimo are there. Now, I could have understood that, like, maybe during the time frame, by the end of the cover page story, maybe they hadn't been found again. Maybe they got locked up on Drum Island, which is most likely what happened. We don't know what happened to them after they got defeated by Chopper. They could have gotten locked up in like the dungeons in like the castle, and they're still sitting there 2 years later. Maybe they decided to reform. I doubt it. Maybe they managed to escape, and then Wapol managed to, with his vast amount of resources at that point in time, find a way to track them down, or they made their way to where Wapol was because they heard all about what he was doing, and they thought, hey, maybe Wapol will hire us again and make us his bodyguards or whatever. And you would think that would have happened, but that's not what happened. But we do see them during Stampede, where they're with Wapol and like the rest of the evil Black Drum crew and everything else like that. And like Chess and Curry Marimo over there, like the weird brother is there. And, Kinderella are there. And like they're there for the Pirate Festival. But like that's not canon. So we don't know what happened to Chess or Curry Marimo. We don't know where they are. This is the last time that we saw them. They were fused together, so they could very well still be fused together. We don't know if Wapol's effects can be undone in that regard. I guess it's a possibility they could be, but I'm not sure. But that's what we have here. This is the chest video that I promised I would make, and here it is. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.